Good evening, our Patriot family, and welcome to another episode of the Fight for Patriotism, where we discuss 3 major events in history and see how it affected today's society that we are in. I'm your producer, host, and brother Zachary Smouse, and with me are your Patriot Brothers Mayhem Studios and Truth with Tom. On tonight's episode, we are going to be discussing the JFK Assassination, September 11, 2001, and Sandy Hook. In my opinion, these 3 events are important to our history because they were basically, in my eyes, the government trying to get control of the system. Because I believe the assassination of JFK was basically a coup to get him out of office so he couldn't complete his agenda because it didn't fit their agenda. I also believe that September 11th was a government operation that was to distract the American people from them actually passing the Patriot Act so they could spy on us. Lastly, I truly think Sandy Hook was an operation by the government as well because it was a Democratic administration and they wanted to distract us from trying their best to limit our Second Amendment. I'll start off with a prayer, play my introduction, and then see how my panel is doing. Dear Heavenly Father, I'm coming to you tonight and asking you to protect this stream so people can watch and understand how far the government has overreached into the American people. Lord, we are trying wholeheartedly to get information out there so we can open the eyes of people who aren't already awakened yet. We love you, my Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Okay, and with that, have a good night, everybody. There you go. What more can we say?
We need you now.
This puppet show stays on because of you fools. We've been dancing with the devil way too long. I know it's fun, but get ready to pay your dues. Oh God, come back home. This crazy world is filled with liars and abusers. Need you now before we're too far gone. I hope one day they finally see the truth. God, we need you now.
Evening, everybody.
I decided not to go with the creepy looking light. There we go.
How are you guys doing today, and what are your thoughts on these topics?
Well, like I said, that's it. You said it all, Zach. Have a good night, everybody.
I'm doing good. Looking forward to getting into this. I have memories of all 3 events, so that may be the advantage I've got over you guys.
Well, what topic do you want us to start with first? Let's go with JFK first. I mean, I kind of spitballed that with Zach a little bit.
I'm going in order.
Okay. All right.
Do you have videos for us to watch or anything?
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
It was over half a century ago, but for so many, it seems like only yesterday.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
And for 54 years, there have been questions about the official story. Was Lee Harvey Oswald really the killer? Did he act alone? Was it a conspiracy?
You shoot the president? I didn't shoot anybody.
The official story just doesn't hang together. And so people are still hungry for information about this shocking event. And they realize that the story they've been given is false.
But now thousands of secret files have finally been made public. Classified documents about the Kennedy assassination, hidden away for decades at the National Archives in Washington, triggering a kind of historical feeding frenzy online and on air.
Today's much anticipated release of highly anticipated documents.
Release of previously classified documents.
Thousands of never before seen classified documents.
Documents like this one from the FBI director 2 days after the assassination. We need to convince the public Oswald is the real assassin. So can those recently released records explain the inexplicable?
Actually, the president's death was preventable and may have been easily prevented if somebody had just read through the file, the FBI and the CIA.
Ahead, the fight over the documents that may disprove the official story of what happened on November 22nd, 1963, and why.
It was this fella Oswald, and we didn't really know much about him, and he came out of nowhere and shot the president. And what these files show is that's a cover story. That was not true.
Friday morning, 11:37. The president's jet lands at the Dallas airport. Love Field.
It all began on the morning of November 22nd, a Friday. But the outwardly warm reception in Dallas masked the outright hatred many in Texas felt for the president. 1963 was the height of the Cold War, and that morning, full-page right-wing newspaper ads called him a traitor, with accusations of being soft on communism. Anti-Catholic Cubans seethed his reluctance to invade and liberate their homeland. But as the presidential limousine carrying the Kennedys and Texas Governor John Connally and his wife wended its way through downtown Dallas just before 12:30 p.m., the route was lined by a crowd many deep. Suddenly, there were gunshots. The president's head jerked back and to the left. Then the motorcade sped away.
It's official now. The president has been assassinated.
But consider this. In the months before that killing, a most unusual movie was shot in and around Washington, D.C.
And I will not resign voluntarily. I'm going to fight you. And then we'll see which one of us the United States is willing to follow.
7 days in May was the story of a military coup against the American president.
Suggesting, Mr. President, there's a military plot to take over the government.
There are some who say it can never happen here.
Incredibly, at the same time, it seems President Kennedy was openly worried about the possibility of a coup. The story made its way to Brian McKenna, then a young Montreal Star reporter, from a Canadian admiral assigned to the Pentagon.
And he told me he couldn't understand how openly they talked about a coup, how openly they talked about 7 Days in May, which was a novel that was being turned into a movie.
That brought a secret presidential messenger to death in a plane crash in Spain. the day a senator of the United States was held against his will.
He found it shocking, actually. He found it, he said it was basically sedition they were speaking, but they were planning something. He had this sense. They were planning something definitely.
What's more, when McKenna contacted the movie's director, he learned the film had been encouraged by none other than President Kennedy.
And he said, Pierre Selinger, the press secretary to John Kennedy, called me one day and said, the president will give you the White House for a weekend to shoot, but he wants you to make that story, that book, into a movie as a warning to Americans of what is possible out there.
It was a shocking scenario, a government takeover, the killing of a president. But in just a few weeks, John Kennedy himself would be dead. The tragic events have been a journalistic touchstone for Brian McKenna ever since.
No, nothing comes close. Nothing comes close to the Kennedy assassination, and the greatest murder mystery of the 20th century, clearly.
And before long, McKenna joined the CBC, where he produced this, the fifth.
Wait a minute. They said that there was a movie just before the assassination?
Right.
Yeah. There's a movie about a coup.
I think they said the title was 7 Days in May.
Mm-hmm. Off of a novel. Yep, they sure did. 7 Days in May.
That sounds like it was set up.
Yeah.
Looking back, it seems suspicious. At the time, you know, something was happening.
Yeah, that's why I always say, pay attention to these movies that they're putting out, because they're not out to entertain; they're out to tell you something.
State investigation of the Kennedy killing on its 20th anniversary drew almost 3 million viewers, the show's biggest audience ever.
20 years ago today, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas.
The president's brother, Robert Kennedy, then Attorney General, was haunted by the possibility of a conspiracy.
And it started with this man. In the fall of 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald was on the move, based in Dallas, but seen distributing pro-communist pamphlets in New Orleans.
Zach, could you please pause
to Mexico City, where he sought visas from the Soviet embassy and Cuban consulate. However, the new documents reveal that if Oswald thought he was under the radar, he certainly was not.
Zach, I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't know whether you can get back to that picture of Oswald holding a rifle or not, but this is one thing that, you know, conspiracy theories aren't new at all. But if you can see that picture again, you'll notice behind him, okay, that one right there.
Mm-hmm.
If you notice behind him, his shadow on the wall goes to the right. If you look up at his face, the shadow of his chin goes to the left.
Yep.
What's happening there? I just wanted to point that out. I'm sorry I interrupted and broke.
Hey, that's a good catch. It's a very good catch. That means it was taken in a studio.
Or the 1960s version of Photoshopped.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think Photoshop?
I'm sure they had to have some kind of primitive Photoshop technology back then. Or Mayhem could be right about studio too, but the shadows definitely going different directions.
Yeah.
with this man. In the fall of 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald was on the move, based in Dallas, but seen distributing pro-communist pamphlets in New Orleans, and traveling to Mexico City, where he sought visas from the Soviet embassy and Cuban consulate. However, the new documents revealed that if Oswald thought he was under the radar, he certainly was not.
Oswald kind of came to the attention of the CIA in 1963 in two places. In New Orleans in August 1963, and in Mexico City about 6 weeks later in October of 1963.
Investigative journalist Jeff Morley says the newly released files detail the extent of American surveillance of Lee Harvey Oswald, especially in Mexico, by the CIA.
Mind you, everywhere Oswald goes on this little venture, he's tripping off CIA surveillance activities. When he walks into the Cuban consulate, they have an impulse camera on that door. So when he penetrates the plane of the door, that camera goes off. When he goes in, when he comes out. Same thing down the street at the Soviet embassy, impulse camera. When he gets into the Soviet embassy, he talks, his voice is picked up on a CIA wiretap.
What's more, Jeff Morley says, the files also show that back in 1963, in Dallas, the FBI had its eyes on Oswald too.
They knew where he was, and they were visiting him and his wife on a regular basis just to kind of check in with them.
Incredibly, given all that, somehow Lee Harvey Oswald found himself in Dallas at the very same time as the president, armed with a rifle, and apparently away from the prying eyes of the CIA and FBI. How could that be? Author Jeff Morley.
And so the question is, were they incompetent? Nobody in the CIA or FBI does anything, and they're just asleep at the wheel. That's one theory. That's the official theory. Everybody was just asleep at the wheel, and he just slipped past it. The other theory, which I lean more towards, is somebody was watching Oswald the whole time, and that's proven by these documents.
After the break, what role do those new documents show the CIA played in the assassination of JFK?
There's two crimes here. One is the murder itself, and the second is the cover-up of the murder. And what we're witnessing with all of these things happening was the cover-up of the murder.
The story doesn't end here. Like the Fifth Estate's Facebook page so you can follow our investigations. We will post updates on stories and special video features that take you deep inside.
It is known as the JFK Records Act, and back in 1992, the U.S. Congress made it American law, ordering the government to make public all records about the Kennedy assassination within 25 years by 2017, releasing tens of thousands of documents kept secret for over half a century.
Well, I think that the intense media coverage shows that people are looking for an answer. They're looking for a better explanation than the one that they...
You guys think that he was hired by the government?
Yes, I think he was hired by the government and groomed by the government.
I'm frankly not convinced he was the gunman.
Yeah, at least not the sole gunman.
Not the
if anything.
only gunman, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, what they just said is, how did he slip past CIA? If he's under CIA surveillance this whole time, for that lengthy amount of time, for him to show up in Dallas to set up a rifle and be in the direct path of the president's motorcade during that whole time, nobody knew where he was and couldn't stop him at any point in time. See, when like, it happens a lot where the FBI, the CIA, they drop the ball. they had somebody under their surveillance, but all of a sudden they stopped surveilling them. Why? Because they acted good for a little bit. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, and there were so many red flags. Now, I read this book. This happened. I was 11 years old when the assassination happened. And it was just a few years later that this book became available. And I wish I could remember the name of the book or even the author, but it was a very controversial book. It was actually delayed. I think the family objected to it coming out and everything. And it was a thick book. I mean, it was like Sears catalog kind of thick, you know, and I was just fascinated with it. But Oswald had been in the Marine Corps, and when he got out of the Marine Corps, and I don't know whether it was an honorable discharge, it was a long time ago. So if my memory gets fuzzy, somebody's able to correct me. That's, you know, I'd appreciate that. But he had been to Russia, and I'm not sure he didn't even renounce his citizenship. And then ended up coming back. He was married to a Russian woman who openly questioned his manhood and, you know, just all kinds of stuff. It was nuts. And this guy had time to set up a nest in that book depository. They even said they found chicken bones where he sat there and had a picnic while he was waiting for that motorcade to come by. So, yeah. They weren't watching him as close as they should have been, you know, even especially back then. You got to remember that was during the McCarthy things where he was accusing everybody of being a communist. And we were watching communists that weren't communists. So a guy that's openly been to Russia and cohorting with the communists is not being watched back then. Give me a break.
Yeah, and another big takeaway is the sealed documents. Like, nothing should ever be kept from the American people. Why would they have to make a law to release slowly after 25 years the truth about it? And most of what they have released is redacted anyways.
Well, you see the easy answer for that. And I remember my grandparents very well. That was to protect the family from unpleasant facts, which, you know, I could buy that. I was a kid.
I believe that there was at least 2 gunmen because Kennedy got shot both from behind and the front.
Yeah.
And if you know anything about bullet trajectory, his head goes forward and then his head goes to the left. You know, and they even said that his head went forward, went to the left. That means that he got shot from behind, forcing his head to go forward, and from the right. So if his head went to the left, then he was shot from the right. If his head went to the right, he would have been shot from the left.
Right.
Yeah. And there's actually an interesting Mandela effect about that whole thing too. The JFK assassination. A lot of people don't remember that there was a third row seat, and there was actually somebody in front of JFK and Jackie. Yeah. Like that, everybody remembers there being the driver, somebody next to the driver, Jackie and JFK.
The governor of Texas and his wife was in the same car.
Yeah.
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 So they would have been in that middle seat.
Mm-hmm.
Right on.
Yep. Blood splatter too. Yep.
Well, and there was that classic scene of Jackie climbing back over the trunk of the car. And in this book I read, they said that was to retrieve a piece of his skull.
Mm-hmm.
And if the bullet had hit from the back, the skull wouldn't have flown to the rear.
Exactly. Exactly. There was somebody in the chat that said something about the driver turned and shot.
You know, I've seen that film, and it's damning. I mean, it's just blurry enough that you can't say for sure, but that driver.
Yeah. I mean, you do see the driver turn.
You do.
You know.
And you can imagine his arm pointing back, too. So, yeah.
Given for 50 years.
Over the years, Jeff Morley has had many unanswered questions. The former Washington Post reporter now writes a JFK website and has authored several books about the assassination and the CIA. Morley says those declassified documents have focused attention on the connection with JFK's accused killer Lee Harvey Oswald that the Central Intelligence Agency has tried so long to hide.
You got to wonder, why go through all that effort if it's so obvious that this one guy killed the president for no reason? So to me, it's almost self-evident that the government is hiding something that's highly embarrassing to them about all of this.
Which takes us to Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, and the facts uncovered by the Fifth Estate broadcast on the assassination's 20th anniversary. Along with the material recently released, it is more troubling than ever.
The president's car is now turning onto Elm Street, and it will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the trademark.
It was almost 12:30 p.m. as the Kennedy motorcade passed the Texas School Book Depository, and gunshots rang out. From the beginning, there were questions about the fatal shots.
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
After the first bullet struck, just 5.6 seconds elapsed until the final shot. This FBI simulation concluded Lee Harvey Oswald, said to be a poor marksman as a Marine, had somehow fired 3 bullets in those few seconds, hitting the president, wounding Texas Governor John Connally, then the lethal shot that killed Kennedy. Ever since, it's been the official U.S. government story. There was only one shooter, the lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald. Another question was about Oswald's weapon, supposedly this $21 bolt-action rifle. But even an expert marksman couldn't fire 3 shots in 5.6 seconds with it. That's when the...
I was just about to bring that up.
What was that, Tom?
I was just about to bring that fact up. It was a bolt-action rifle, and to aim and accurately fire 3 rounds. Well, they already said even an expert marksman found it impossible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm just upset that the rifle was so cheap back then.
And he got it through the mail.
Yeah. Yeah, and earlier we saw the video of where, you know, he was like, I didn't shoot anybody. That kind of takes me back to that movie Shooter, you know, where he ran up and he's like, I didn't shoot the president, you know. And it was a whole cover up to take out the Archbishop of Africa and all of that. Like, why would... Go ahead, Zach. Sorry.
See, that's another question that raises my concerns because shooting that fast isn't really possible.
Mm-mm.
That fast and that accurately. I mean, you can move 3 rounds pretty quick, but accurate? is a completely different, because I didn't remember the scope, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. Three shots, moving target. Very difficult.
Yeah. And I personally have always had trouble getting a scope on target really fast, because that, you got to be the right distance. Your eye has to be the right distance from the scope. Of course, a guy that had been trained in the Marine Corps knows, much better than me how that's supposed to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to ensure that it does happen, like a military operation, if you're going after a high value target, that you would have 2 or 3 sniper teams throughout. That way, if one was just off, they ensured that the target was actually taken out. Yeah. In urban, that's also in urban combat too. Like
Right.
Open field, it'd be 1 sniper. But that's an urban environment. Dallas, Texas. You would want to make sure that you had the target taken out. So I honestly think there was 3 shooters.
Really? That makes sense.
Story changed, deciding the president's and governor's wounds were caused not by 3 bullets, but just 2. The first shot, they now argued, hit both men.
This bullet, same ammunition. It looks like a...
In our original report, forensic pathologist ▴ explained what was called the single bullet theory.
Single bullet theory says that 1 bullet struck the president in the back, coursed through his upper chest, exited from the front of his neck, re-entered John Connolly's back, pierced the right lung, collapsing it, severed a vein, artery, and nerve, broke the right 5th rib, destroying 5 inches of that bone, exited from the front of the governor's right chest, re-entered the back of the governor's right forearm, caused a comminuted fracture of the distal end of the radius, a very thick bone, partially severed a vein, artery, and nerve, exited from the front of the governor's right wrist, re-entered the governor's left thigh, went all the way down to the femur, the big bone in the thigh, bounced back, came out through the same small hole, fell into the governor's clothing, from his clothing onto the stretcher, and was fortuitously found a few hours later in the afternoon on Friday, November 22nd, 1963, at Parkland Memorial Hospital by a maintenance employee who was trying to get to the men's room and found a corridor blocked by stretchers.
My take on the magic bullet theory is nobody in the car believed that that's what happened.
According to author and journalist Jeff Morley, the 4 other occupants of the presidential limousine rejected the magic bullet theory.
Jackie didn't think that's what happened. She said, I don't remember it that way. Governor Connolly said it did not happen, flatly, that the first bullet hit President Kennedy and the second bullet hit him. Governor Connolly's wife, who was sitting in the jump seat with Governor Connolly, Nellie Connolly, said the same thing. The Connollys were both hunters, experienced with guns. And Roy Kellerman, the Secret Service man sitting in the front seat, said we were hit with a flurry of shots, including 1 from the front.
Then came this, the 8mm film of the fatal shot taken by Abraham Zapruder and kept secret by the CIA since 1963, was finally released 12 years after the assassination. For the first time, the world could see John Kennedy put hands to throat as the first bullet rips through him from back to front. But watch as another bullet strikes. The president's head snaps backwards, convincing many of a second gunman in front of the car. In other words, a conspiracy. In just over an hour, the Dallas police allegedly found that gunman in a nearby movie theater, then whisked him to headquarters. He was former Marine and known communist sympathizer Lee Harvey Oswald. The only record of what he said was as police escorted him through the throngs of reporters and cameras.
Against the wall. All right, these people have given me a hearing without legal representation or anything. I didn't shoot anybody, no, sir.
And another question. On his arrest in Dallas, what did the U.S. government know about Lee Harvey Oswald?
Now recall, the story was there was this fella Oswald, and we didn't really know much about him, and he came out of nowhere and shot the president. And what these files show is that's a cover story. That was not true. High-level CIA officials were paying attention to Oswald from November 1959 to November 1963.
And the newly released records support that.
Magic bullet theory.
You know, they remarked about the Connollys being hunters, and anybody that has ever shot a deer. Now, of course, we're using soft-tipped ammunition, some hollow points, but bullets don't act like that.
Yeah.
They don't change direction. And yeah, you can say, well, it hit something and that diverted it, but they also lose speed every time they hit something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't think there's any doubt in anybody's mind we were lied to. The question is why.
Yeah. Yeah, and the biggest thing that they said right there is the police within an hour. Within an hour. I mean, have people, you know, if you watch the first 48, it takes them at least 48 hours to find the right information.
A dark movie theater, there were no cell phones to track. How in the world would they even think, let's go look in this movie theater?
Mm-hmm.
You know? It's the magical arrest. That's what they ought to be talking about.
Yeah.
Well, that's odd, isn't it? The government was already watching him? Why?
Oh, because of his communist sympathies and the trip to Russia. Back then, things like that drew a lot of attention.
Mm-hmm.
And I again go back to McCarthy. There was a justified paranoia of communism. And it's too bad we didn't take McCarthy a little more seriously, because we're paying for that lack of seriousness right now.
Yeah. We had somebody in the chat, Yankee, said they had to cover it up. JFK pissed off the mob, the CIA, and the Cubans. And what's funny is he was a Democrat, and he was speaking out against the Democrats. He didn't like the Democrat Party and what they were doing. He went against Congress, which at that time, I believe, I'm not old enough to know, but I think wasn't Congress mainly the Democrats had control over it.
Oh man, I have no idea.
I don't remember, but I think that's what it was.
You got to remember, I was 11 years old.
Right.
I can remember, I don't even know where I got them, but I brought bumper stickers, Kennedy bumper stickers home. And one of my grandfather put him on his car. And of course, there was no way in this world this hardcore Republican was going to do that. But I do remember, just to appease me, 'cause they were bumper stickers. They were cool.
Mm-hmm.
he took them out to his shop and put them on the door, and he said, we'll just turn them upside down because that's what's going to happen anyway when the election comes. Of course, he was wrong about that. But I got no clue what was going on politically in this country at that time.
Honestly, I believe if Kennedy wasn't assassinated, we would have a better pathway.
I agree with you, Zach.
Yep.
We lost our innocence forever with that event. I mean, just not from personal memory, but just from the looking at the times. And, then it didn't take me too many years to get a little bit older, but we were fairly happy with the exception of the race problems. And who knows that wasn't being stirred up and intensified and magnified. But, we believed the government at that time because we thought we could. Our parents thought they could. Let me put it that way. No, I can't say we. But all that changed when Kennedy died. Silver Girl, I was in 6th grade, and we must have been talking about Abraham Lincoln. Now, I went to school in a 4-room schoolhouse, so there were 2 grades in each room. And the principal taught 7th and 8th grade. But he came into our classroom, and I can still see that man leaning on the teacher's desk with his arms straight and said that basically the president has been shot. And I thought he was talking about Lincoln. And they made it clear, no, President Kennedy. And I don't remember if they turned us out early or we probably finished the school day, but I couldn't wait to get home to tell my mother was here. And of course, my grandparents. And I came busting through the door that Kennedy's been shot. And then, of course, kids don't understand the magnitude of stuff like that. But it was very somber when I got in with this news, and then I was told he's dead. And that weekend was a big change in my life because up to that point, the television hardly ever got turned on. You had, I think, 15 minutes worth of news at 6 o'clock or something that my grandfather would watch. Nobody was allowed to breathe loud, But I remember the TV was on. From the time it came on the air, I think it went off the air at 11:30 or 12 o'clock at night, but he had it on the entire weekend. And of course, we watched Jack Ruby shoot Oswald on live TV. But yeah, that's my memory of that, Silver Girl. To this day, you hear that statement, you remember exactly where you were and what you were doing. And that's where I was. But it changed us. It robbed us of a wonderful innocence. And of course, 5 years later, then you've got Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and, I don't remember right off who else, but, assassination became a word that had never been spoken before.
I do believe he would because he was changing this country for the good and they didn't like it.
Yeah. Yeah, and like if you look at the movie 13 Days, it was about the Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK. JFK was very anti-war. He did everything he could to prevent war. And somebody said in the chat, said that if JFK hadn't have been assassinated, Vietnam wouldn't have happened. And I agree. Well, it probably would have happened, but we would have went in late. Maybe. I don't know.
Or maybe gone in with the intentions of actually winning a war again.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Or not at all, you know.
Right.
Would have said, hey, this is not a war that we need to be involved in whatsoever. And yeah, he was a good man, you know. He was, yeah, you know, they want to paint the picture of, okay, so what if he may or may not have had an affair or whatever, but you know, what happens in his personal life, really, you know. But somebody that wants to stay out of a war and send young men to die, you know, he didn't want to do that.
Well, and then the line back then was, if we don't fight them over there, we'll have to fight them here.
That man just realized who I was. There.
Files that fly in the face of the official story.
What this release tells me more is CIA's capabilities to monitor and manipulate Oswald.
And the documents show what he did and with whom. For example, this CIA cable dated October 8th, 1963, about Oswald's visit to Mexico City and his meeting at the Soviet embassy with Valery Kostakov, head of the KGB's Department 13, its assassinations branch. That cable went all the way to the top of the CIA, the head of U.S. counterintelligence, legendary American spy, James Angleton.
The CIA cover story is, our interest in Oswald was merely routine. Well, it wasn't routine. It was intensive, and it was at a very high level.
And there is another recently declassified document that raises questions. 2 days after Oswald was arrested, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover sent a memo marked secret, in which he reveals the FBI had got a warning that Oswald would be killed, which he says was passed on to the Dallas police, to ask that Oswald be given sufficient protection, he wrote. If so, it didn't work. A few hours later, Lee Harvey Oswald was brought down by elevator to the basement of police headquarters.
There's a shot. Oswald has been shot.
For Jeff Morley, Hoover's memo begs the question, was it incompetence or willful ignorance?
No, and that portion of the memo compounds the travesty of the chief assassination suspect being killed in police custody, because the Dallas police had been warned and they ignored the warning and took the prisoner into an unsecured area.
This is the man who shot Oswald, Jack Ruby, a local nightclub owner and small-time mobster. Authorities described him as insane with grief over President Kennedy's death. They concluded that after Oswald killed Kennedy, Ruby killed him, and they both acted alone. But what about Jack Ruby's ties to the mob? What might they indicate? In our original show, Eric Malling spoke to Richard Billings, a congressional staff member who investigated the Kennedy assassination in the late 1970s.
The main piece of evidence of organized crime complicity in the conspiracy is Jack Ruby.
According to Billings, Ruby was a bona fide mafia member.
He was working for mobsters. He was a runner for Al Capone, messenger boy when he was a kid. He worked for the mob in Chicago. Ruby was nothing else but mob.
And insiders said Ruby's killing of Oswald had the hallmarks of a gangland hit, quickly approaching the victim, jamming the gun in his stomach, pulling the trigger. So why would the American mafia want to be complicit in the assassination of the president? This CIA document, also recently released, refers to the strong drive to get after the mafia by the Kennedys, both JFK and Attorney General Robert. By 1963, it was no secret the mob was fighting back. Before he died, Jack Ruby told friends and family his role in Dallas had been part of a much larger plot.
Do you think Jack was connected to Oswald before this?
Probably.
It's a good possibility, yeah.
I also feel like, you know, the plan was that probably Oswald was going to get gunned down during his arrest. But now we got a problem. This guy's alive. And we all know he's a loser. And he's probably not mentally strong enough to maintain a story. He's going to sing. So we got to take him out.
Yeah, it's called cleaning up loose ends.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That was one of the biggest plot points in Jack Reacher, remember?
I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, it's a great movie. Great movie.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, if something didn't go as planned, they had to clean up the loose ends and make people look like they rushed out of town and all kinds of stuff.
And, you know, it got to you know, like pilots refer to, you know, when you're taking an airplane off, you reach a point of no return. You got to commit. And they had no choice but to take Oswald out.
Right. And who better than a mobster, you know?
Right. Right. So two crazy guys.
Yeah.
Upset everything.
And consider this, the memo written by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover after Kennedy was killed, also recently released. It's seen by many as proof that Lee Harvey Oswald was the U.S. government's patsy in JFK's death. Hoover wrote, "I am concerned about having something issued so we can convince the public Oswald is the real assassin."
And so in that moment, the president's been dead for less than 48 hours, and Hoover has already dictated the result that the official investigation, which has not begun, will reach. So the conclusion of the assassination was dictated before the investigation began. That's what that J. Edgar Hoover memo tells us.
There's two crimes here. One is the murder itself, and the second is the cover-up of the murder.
For former CBC producer Brian McKenna, the more he dug into the JFK story, the more he was convinced a conspiracy killed Kennedy. He says the most telling clue was the dramatic change in the condition of the president's body from the emergency room in Dallas to the autopsy outside Washington. When we come back.
I mean, you don't alter a body. You don't mess with dead people. It's certainly not a president's body.
How then? To explain this.
We got the last part of the sheet off. There was just a gasp in the room. And I looked down and I said to myself, my God, there's no brain. It's all gone.
There's always more to our stories. You can keep up with the Fifth Estate by subscribing to our weekly newsletter. We'll tell you what we're working on and share updates on past stories. Sign up on our website at cbc.
That was hit in the head. Received reports here at Parkland. The first unconfirmed reports say the president was hit in the head. That's an unconfirmed report.
To this day, the official story is that the shot that killed John Kennedy hit him in the head from behind. But is that what the autopsy showed? It's an important question because doubts about the integrity of JFK's medical records are among the most contentious issues surrounding the assassination. When Kennedy was declared dead, The doctors who had tried to save him at Parkland Hospital in Dallas gave a briefing. Little attention has been paid to it, but incredibly, what they said was the opposite of the official story. The doctors described the fatal shot, small entry wound in front, as the Zapruder film seems to show, massive exit wound in the back. What's more, they said Kennedy's brain was largely intact when they put his body on the plane for the autopsy in Bethesda, Maryland.
So in Parkland, all of these doctors and radiologists and whatever saw this hole in the back of Kennedy's head, and then the body and the story switches to Bethesda, the American Naval Hospital.
Brian McKenna, who produced the 1983 Fifth Estate investigation, Who Killed JFK, concluded that when the body reached the Naval Hospital outside Washington, its condition had drastically changed.
And there, the doctors saw that damage to the head was not there. And but there was a whole top of Kennedy's head was gone. And it was like, this can't be happening. I mean, it's so beyond outrage. But the facts were very clear.
Everybody remembers where they were on November 22nd. Everybody.
In McKenna's landmark documentary, he followed author David Lifton, who presented evidence that he said proved the president's body had been tampered with.
I mean, you don't alter a body. You don't mess with dead people, dead bodies, and certainly not a president's body. And on the other hand, there's evidence of all these different activities occurring.
David Lifton had located and interviewed the people who had been part of the chain of custody for Kennedy's body after he died. At Parkland Hospital, an orderly named Aubrey Reich wrapped the president in a white sheet before placing him in a coffin and closing the lid.
You didn't use a body bag,
No, sir. No way.
Absolutely no question about that?
No way.
How can you be certain?
I was there.
And you remember?
I remember picking him up. I was one that had the blood on my shirt and everything from the body.
And Aubrey Reich says the presidential casket was an expensive one, made of bronze. And at Dallas Airport, that's what we saw loaded onto Air Force One. After Lyndon Johnson was sworn in as the new U.S. president, they began the flight back to the Capitol. Upon landing, the bronze coffin was removed from the cargo bay and loaded into a hearse for transport to the Naval Hospital in Bethesda, Maryland, where the autopsy would be performed. Dennis David was a naval officer on duty at Bethesda when the body arrived. But in 1983, he said the casket he unloaded wasn't bronze.
We offloaded a casket.
So this isn't adding up? Why was he messed with?
Evidence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this information is new to me. So I've never heard of that.
Bug Dude has just mentioned a video he saw, and I think it's the same one I saw. Zach, if I can find it, it pops back up periodically. I'll get you the link for it. But her point was, why was the casket closed at the funeral? And it's maybe 40 minutes or so, but she goes into so much with this casket that I'll get it for you. You'll be interested in watching it. I think it's the same thing that Bug Dude's talking about.
Yeah.
The lady that does it is a little bit silly and weird, but it's a good story. Yeah, and again, you know, they originally started talking about solid bullets, full metal jacket bullets.
Mm-hmm.
And now all of a sudden it's expanded in his head. They don't do that.
Yeah, no, they don't do that. Yeah. Yeah,
You remember all those bullets were
into the autopsy.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Zach. I'm sorry. I talk too much. Get an old man started. Can't shut him up.
What was your idea, Tom?
Oh no, I was just saying that the pictures of the rounds we saw were all solid and still intact. And something that would have a small entry room and a wound and a massive exit wound means that bullet expanded, mushroomed, like we say. So, you know, there's a lie right there that any of us can see.
Yeah, that is what a hollow point does.
Or soft tip.
Yeah.
This casket is a plain gray box, if you will, metal box. Anybody who's ever been in Vietnam would know what I'm talking about. We shipped hundreds of bodies out of there in the same type of casket. It's just a plain shipping casket.
It was a very plain casket. And
It was medical technician Paul O'Connor who opened the casket in the autopsy room.
There was nothing fancy about it as far as being bronze. It wasn't bronze.
At the end of this hall at the Bethesda Naval Hospital, the autopsy began. If the president's body had left Dallas wrapped in a white sheet, that's not what Paul O'Connor found, as he told the Fifth Estate.
He opened the whole casket up, and there was a gray body bag, zipped shut. We unzipped the body bag, and the president's body was lifted out of the body bag, completely naked except for a sheet wrapped around his head, a bloody sheet.
But there was more. Remember, the doctors in Dallas reported the president's brain was mostly intact when it left there. But that's not what they discovered in Bethesda.
We got the last part of the sheet off. There was just a gasp in the room. And I looked down and I said to myself, my God, there's no brain. It's all gone.
In this photo, the man in the white medical gown was X-ray technician Gerald Custer, who says when he X-rayed John Kennedy's skull, there essentially was no brain remaining.
I could fit both of my hands right inside the skull cavity. And like I had mentioned, that I brought my hands back and there were still little pieces of brain cells that I had to take off my hands. And there was still blood on it.
But for some reason, the final autopsy report stated the brain they'd examined was almost complete.
I don't know where they got it from. It surely wasn't the president's.
As outlandish as it may sound, David Lifton believes the evidence suggests that between his death in Dallas and arrival in Bethesda, John Kennedy's body was secretly removed from the bronze coffin, his wounds surgically altered. Then he was sent ahead in that gray metal casket to arrive before the autopsy. Essentially, it was a medical forgery seemingly intended to prove the fatal shot could only have come from Lee Harvey Oswald's gun. Now, 30 years since our first story, more than 50 since JFK died, the issues surrounding his assassination remain the focal point of writer David Lifton's career, if not his life.
After so long, it's been 50 years now, half a century, what does it matter if Oswald acted alone or not?
Well, I'm going to use the word that I don't like to use, but basically we had a coup. That's what this is all about. Not about a second assassin or whether there's somebody hiding behind a fence or a bush. Is the story that Oswald shot the president a true story or a fictional story? If it's a true story, Johnson became president by a quirk of fate. If it's a fictional story, he became president by design. Now, I say it's a fictional story because the evidence is fraudulent.
It was a conclusion former producer Brian McKenna came to agree with.
What we were witnessing with all of these things happening was the cover-up of the murder. And the most graphic, in a sense, outrageous piece of the puzzle was what happened to the president's body.
The declassified documents released recently say nothing about the president's body or his brain. But not all the Kennedy files have yet been made public. And that is why, as you will see when we come back, there now is growing pressure to release those final secrets.
The overwhelming majority of Americans are on our side. Release it all now. And when that happens, we're going to learn something very new and very interesting about the assassination of JFK. I'm quite confident of that.
He is unquestionably an American icon, the most glamorous president ever, with a White House called Camelot for a reason. So it should come as no surprise John Kennedy's assassination would generate 5 million pages of documents, of which, even after the recent release, thousands remain in the National Archives in Washington, still kept secret. According to many who have followed this story for decades, like investigative journalist Brian McKenna, those final files are likely the crucial ones.
Well, I think we're in the crown jewels now. But the fact that they're still trying to hide this stuff, there's something explosive there. I mean, all of the principal players are dead. So why are they still defending this? Why are they still, putting a stone circle around it and saying no one can go there?
Donald J. Trump! Yet in the name of national security, President Donald Trump has pushed the deadline for release of the final documents to April 2018. Author Jeff Morley isn't convinced it will happen even then.
What the fact that they didn't comply with the law tells us is they intend to keep some of this material secret indefinitely. And I say it stands to reason, it's almost axiomatic, that the things that they don't release are going to be the most sensitive. Now, some people say, well, they're just hiding nothing. I wonder about that. If they're hiding it for a reason. And they're gonna try and hide this story.
So what is still being hidden? Perhaps CIA secrets. Morley has investigated the surveillance of Lee Harvey Oswald by both the CIA and FBI, especially after Oswald met KGB assassinations officer Valery Kostakov in the months before Kennedy was killed.
Oswald comes back to the United States, and the CIA never says, well, to the FBI, why don't you go go interview that guy and find out why was he talking to Kostakov? That never happened. It wasn't that the CIA ignored evidence that Oswald was a threat to the president. They ignored proof that he was a threat to U.S. security. It's a dog that didn't bark in the old Sherlock Holmes story. It's like, why? That's the thing that you would have expected to happen. The dog should have barked at Oswald, and it doesn't. And that enables him to go to Dealey Plaza.
Given all the revelations, former Fifth Estate producer Brian McKenna says he's come to a troubling conclusion.
I think it's pretty clear that Oswald was a CIA agent at this point. And the evidence is not just piling up and piling up. That they were running him. They were controlling him.
And I think we're getting closer to the possibility that CIA officers were manipulating Oswald before. Now, they could have been manipulating him for other purposes, like to gather intelligence or, lure the KGB into something, or they could be manipulating him for something that was going to happen on November 22nd. That part of the story we don't know. But what these documents do for me is they heighten that possibility.
The possible rationales for killing Kennedy abound. Reports he intended to withdraw U.S. troops from Vietnam. A change of heart about deposing Fidel Castro. His initiatives to end the Cold War with the Soviets. Any or all could have made Kennedy a target at home or abroad. Indeed, Brian McKenna believes that by 1963, John Kennedy's policies made him persona non grata to many in the U.S. government and military.
Serious stuff. I believe there was a coup d'etat. That's what happened on November 22nd, 1963. There was this violent change in power in the United States, and it's never been the same since.
Years later, in Havana with former Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, McKenna met and spoke with Fidel Castro. Castro and Kennedy certainly had differences, but they both clashed with the CIA, It made for an interesting chat with the Cuban leader.
I said, "Can we talk about the Kennedy assassination?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "So, was it the anti-Castro Cubans?" He said, "A lot of them were involved, but they couldn't have been alone." And he just said, "The CIA."
There may well be an institutional reluctance to release, but for those seeking the secrets, there's always hope.
Do you ever expect to see that release?
Yeah, I do expect it. I do expect it to be released. It's not going to be easy. The thing that people like me have going for us, the overwhelming majority of Americans are on our side. Release it all now. And as long as that's true, I think that the public pressure will be able to push all of this material out into the open. And when that happens, we're going to learn something very new and very interesting about the assassination of JFK. I'm quite confident of that.
I think something's going to happen. I really do. It may take another 5, 10 years, hopefully not beyond that. But I think that there's something explosive that's going to happen in the Kennedy story. And I think we're going to find out there's a real reason why they're hiding documents even now.
54 years later and counting, many are convinced the killing of President John F. Kennedy goes far beyond the lone gunman and the magic bullet that are still the U.S. government's official story. But unless and until those remaining records are finally released, the haunting question will remain as well. Who killed JFK?
And exactly why.
Yeah. Yeah, but why and who? Who and why? We already know how and where.
And really, who is benefiting right now from these documents not being released? Like the guy said, all the major players are dead.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even if they were 20 years old at the time, they'd be in their 80s now. And I doubt that any of them were as young as 20. So I don't get it. What's the need for the secrecy now?
What's up, Michelle? I see you in chat. Yeah, that's Angry's got a good question. That's probably why they got the T-Man out, because he was going to try to release all the documents. He wanted
anything's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. But even so, who's it going to damage if they're
right? Well, it's going to damage. What it really is going to do is going to damage the trust that we don't have really for the government. But you know, they're like, oh, we lied about this back then. Now they're going to be like questioning everything we've done from then till now.
Oh, but we can trust them now, man. All that's changed, you know.
Yeah.
You got to believe
it. They found Jesus.
Yeah.
I believe that the government is benefiting because they don't want us in control.
Yep, that's it.
And they might face a revolt, a total revolt, if and when it comes out. I mean, are they just putting off the inevitable anyway? I almost hope so. I didn't say that on Zach's panel, though.
No, you said that on somebody else's panel.
I find that shit to my own stream. Would you gentlemen excuse me just a moment, please?
Oh, yeah, sure. Sure. That's a really good video, Zach, that you found for JFK. And that's on YouTube, right? I'm actually surprised because like all the videos I was trying to find for you and all the other stuff, I couldn't find them, man. You know, And it's like, I know, I figured with the JFK stuff, with the release of the documents now, can't really hide it off of YouTube. But as far as like the 9/11 videos I've seen and the Sandy Hook videos I've seen, you really can't find them. You know, and that makes you wonder, what do they have to hide? If it's not true, why hide it?
I kept trying to research good videos.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw you, Michelle. I said hi. Yeah, after this stream, I got to talk to you about something, Zach, by the way. Like, after the stream. It's all good. There's Alex Jones taking a reversal on his... Oh. Yeah. Yeah, I saw that. Valerian. I think they got to Alex on that, because I remember after Sandy Hook watching Alex Jones putting his 2 cents out there, saying what he said, and then just recently, a couple years ago, he did the reversal on it and said, "Oh, I never said that." I was like, dude, yeah, you did. You did. Stick to your guns, bro. Yeah. Oh, are we already starting to, the chat's already talking about Sandy Hook. Are we done with JFK? Okay. What's the next one, Zach? Because they're starting to talk about Sandy Hook.
By the way, guys, I'm going to be only showing the next video for about 40 minutes. It's way too long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. Just and remember what I told you, Zach. Remember, take breaks in between. That way you don't get the copyright strike or anything. You got to react to it. Okay. Yes. Ooh, this is a good one.
We're on the floor and we can't breathe. And it's very, very, very hot. Okay. All I see is smoke. Please. I'm gonna die, aren't I? No. Say I'm gonna die. Ma'am, say your prayers. And we're not gonna think positive, because you gotta help each other get off the floor. I'm now. It's so hot. I'm hurrying up. Hello? Help! Hello, ma'am?
Osama bin Laden is the world's most wanted terrorist. Many to fight the bin Laden terrorist organization, Al-Qaeda,
Making him arguably the most wanted man in the world.
Punish. I want justice. And there's an old poster out west, as I recall, that said "Wanted, dead or alive."
If you go to the FBI website, they've got Osama bin Laden. And if you go to Osama bin Laden's webpage on the FBI most wanted terrorist list, you find that he's been indicted for the 1998 attacks, but not for 9/11. And in fact, a number of journalists called up the FBI and said, well, look, why have you not connected bin Laden to 9/11? And they said, well, I'm afraid we just don't have the evidence. that's just the beginning.
On September 11, 2001, I was employed by a company called Eurobrokers, and our offices were on the 84th floor of the South Tower, which was the second building to be hit that day with an airplane. And I was working away at my computer, and at 8:46 in the morning, there was this loud boom.
At 8:46 and 40 seconds, American Airlines Flight 11 hits the North Tower of the World Trade Center, causing extensive damage between the 93rd and the 99th floors.
And the announcement from the Port Authority came, "Your attention, please. Building 2, our building, Building 2 is secure. There is no need to evacuate Building 2. And 2 or 3 minutes later, I started talking with one fellow named Bobby Call. And Bobby told me that he had been down about 8 floors, 10 floors, heard the announcement, and had come back up. And as he was telling me this, boom, boom, this double explosion, and our building shook.
At 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 hits the South Tower.
Everything just exploded in our room. Now we're on the 84th floor. What I didn't know at the time was that the second plane had hit 6 floors below us on the 78th floor. So we're 6 floors above impact. I heard this banging on the wall and this faint scream for help inside the 81st floor. I hooked underneath him and I pulled him up. He said that later that I was like Superman. And we came up and over and I fell back down on my back. And this stranger landed on top of me and he gave me this big kiss. We got up, dusted ourselves off. And I said, "Come on, let's go home."
The 2 towers shake considerably with the first impact, but they immediately return to their original structural position. Why? Because they were specifically designed to do this in the event of a plane crash.
Towers were very solidly built. It's like a tree. You see, when you bend a tree, you have all these fibers in the tree, but they're interconnected. So when the tree bends, it can.
What were you thinking when this happened? I was at school in 2nd grade.
I was a senior in high school. I I was in homeroom, I remember. It was Miss Felipe's class. And Miss Cabrera and Miss Felipe were good friends. Miss Cabrera came running in. And it's so weird how you remember everything of that day, you know. But you forget all the other days that, you know, like your birthday, you know, that's kind of an important day, Christmases and stuff. And she came in and she said, hey, turn on the television, turn on the news. And when she turned it on, it had the first tower, you know, was smoking pretty bad. And then, like, that's all we did all day was watch the news. And we went to computer lab was the next place, and we turned on the news. And right as we were watching it, we see the second plane come in and hit, you know. And I remember before it even hit, I was like, what the hell is that? You guys see that? Boom! Like, oh shit, you know. And then, yeah, it changed my life. I joined the Army afterwards, after I graduated, and headed off to basic and went to Afghanistan twice. That's all I gotta say about that.
What about you, Brother Tom?
Oh, he's muted.
I was actually still in bed, and my wife came up and said, I think we're at war. I said, what are you talking about? And she said well, she just said something about skyscrapers in New York being bombed. And of course, that got me up. I guess I was, 49 years old in 2001. So, you know, just coming down and walking into that on the TV, you weren't getting, I wasn't getting as much information as I needed. So I remember calling my brother-in-law, who was like you, Mayhem, and had been watching it from, you know, minutes into it. So I got the lowdown on what was happening and watching TV. And I remember looking up, and it was like, where's the second building? And it had collapsed. And I still couldn't, it was just so unreal. I didn't really know what was going on. But in my head that morning, I was thinking Bin Laden before I heard the name on TV, just because of his past. But I think it changed everybody's life. That was kind of what got me into sitting in front of the TV watching the news anytime I wasn't working, which was hard on my marriage. I got obsessed with it. And of course, I wanted these people destroyed in the most painful way that could be done. But yeah, it was a hell of a day.
Oh, finding Kino. Good question. That link that I shared in there, it's called Loose Change, the final cut. I was on my second deployment. Somebody recommended I watch that. And I watched it, the whole thing. And I was like, my only reaction is, and I'm sorry to say this, Zach, I'm going to use a curse word, but I was like, motherfucker. I can't believe they did that. You watch that video right there. And the thing about that video, Loose Change, I did a little research afterwards. You know, after I saw it, I was like, that can't be. The guy that did that video, he set out to make kind of a parody and just kind of claim that the government did it. But he said the more he was doing research and reaching out to experts and everything, the more he found out that, because he was going to do it fiction, the more it went from fiction to this might not be fiction anymore. It's going to be nonfiction.
I just wrote that down. I'll have to look into that. Is that a movie or a video or
it's
what?
it's a video. I put it in the
I don't even have
chat.
YouTube up. I can't get to
Oh,
videos.
here, I'll put it in
Links.
the private chat then for you. Let me go grab it. Let me go back and grab it. There's another one too I'm going to share. It's actually from it was a podcast that surprisingly was, I saw it 2 years ago, but it was re-uploaded 5 months ago, which is weird. But it was from the perspective of flight attendant. All right, there you go, Tom.
All
in
right.
the private chat. That's the loose change.
I should be
Well,
able to save this without getting kicked off of here.
Should be. If you do, I apologize.
And save.
What? I have no idea what to think about that.
Oh, Lordy. Mods, get that.
You see, at that time, Tom is still taking everything at face value, and I hadn't learned to question things. So what I thought I saw was what I thought was really happening.
The plane in PA, you know, the why conspiracy theories actually exist is because people logically try to connect things to other things, you know, like a plane crash, for example, in a field. You're going to compare it to other plane crashes of a similar nature. And I remember a plane crash in the Everglades, you know, and there was just destruction everywhere, like, you know, and I should have known when I saw that the big hole in the ground in Pennsylvania, everything got disintegrated, you know, just like that. Yeah, it just vaporized, you know, and then they tried to explain that everything was already parted out, but the media just got there, you know. Why was it carted out before the media even got there? Even that's kind of fishy. You know, so me personally, I that hole in the ground looked like a missile hit. I've seen missiles.
Handle that motion.
Nevertheless, 56 minutes after Flight 175 strikes the South Tower, it suddenly collapses in on itself.
We looked back at the Trade Center, the tower that we just come out of. We started to see it, you know, boom, 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 move. And we stared in disbelief as this took about 8 or 10 seconds for the whole tower just to go straight down and dissolved into its own ash.
We started to go in, and all of a sudden there were people jumping from the towers. One jumped down and hit a fireman. At 10:28, the North Tower also collapses. I threw away my oxygen mask to make me lighter. I started running because when I turned around, I saw the tower coming down. Then there was all this dust that got me.
Do not hit anybody as you drive.
When I got home, all my family was waiting for me. And I was lucky to come back to my family. All my friends, they never came back. The official justification for the inexplicable collapse of the Twin Towers was written by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Between 2002 and 2006, they studied the demolition of the World Trade Center, reaching the conclusion that the collapse of the towers was caused by the combined effects of the impact of the airplanes and the resulting fires started by these impacts. We have been told by the very people who designed and built these towers that they should have resisted the impact of more than one airplane. We have to ask ourselves, did the engineers and architects imagine that airplanes could crash into the towers without any fuel? Perhaps they thought that the airplanes could get there by just blowing in the breeze.
Never before or after 9/11 have steel frame towers collapsed due to fire.
In 2005, there was a fearsome conflagration in Madrid. A skyscraper went up in flames. It was a huge torch that kept burning for 20 hours, 20 consecutive hours. But in the end, the load-bearing structure remained intact. The skyscraper did not fall down. As you can see, the building is enveloped in flames. This skyscraper was not yet complete. It was still under construction. Nevertheless, it remained standing.
I hate to say that guy's eye is creepy as hell.
You should know is the white color of the flames. This means that there is a lot of oxygen burning. If you look at the flames coming from the two towers in New York, we can see instead that the flames are dark red and the smoke is black.
The fires that were burning in these towers was a dark gray, a heavy, almost black gray smoke coming off. This implies an oxygen-starved fire.
Nevertheless, 55 minutes later, the whole tower collapses. According to the official NIST version of events, at a certain point, the steel structure of the towers gave way. It no longer had the structural strength that it had at the beginning. And all of this was supposed to be because of the immense heat. And here is something difficult to explain. We know that at some point, certain people managed to walk down from the top of this tower and cross the point where the fire was strongest. Somehow they reached the bottom of the tower. How did they manage to do that?
I don't know. When I looked down there, I didn't see flames. I just sensed that it was the right thing to go and try and test it. We would go as far as we could until we were stopped by flames. And when we came to the 78th floor, the last layer was standing, but it was cracked. And there were flames licking up the other side of the wall like this. It wasn't a roaring inferno. I sensed that the flames were maybe starved for oxygen right there, in the interior. We kept going, and we got onto the 74th floor. When we got down that far, normal conditions. The lights were on, fresh air coming up from below.
So the temperature inside the building was not particularly high, as we can see from the presence of this woman who is standing at the precise point where the plane impacted. In order to verify the way the buildings collapsed and how the heat had
Yeah, that's something I didn't even know either. I didn't know some of the people from the top floor were able to get past that. But
in the stairwells, yeah.
But like I said earlier, people try to correlate something with another event, and they did a side by side for 20 hours in Madrid. Skyscraper is burning, never collapsed, just burnt the exterior, and then just a couple hours in New York. I don't even think it was a couple hours. I think it was like, the first one was 30 minutes, 40 minutes, something like that. It was very fast. Happened very fast. But like people were saying in the chat, collapsed just like a controlled explosion. Yeah, a demolition. And then what most people don't know is Tower 7 fell in the same exact way, but it was never even hit. Explain that one.
I can fall back on 30 years experience being an oil burner mechanic. And I can't compare diesel fuel with jet fuel because I've never seen jet fuel. I don't know how it works, what it is. But you could see in that tower, that was a dirty, cold fire. That's how I would describe it. I have seen well-tuned oil burners run for 15 years inside of a heat exchanger that's maybe 1/8 of an inch thick. And that heat exchanger sustains no damage whatsoever. And I'm no expert, but I would assume that building girders are a little bit heavier than 1/8 of an inch thick. So this is not a fuel fire that destroyed that building.
No.
So what are your thoughts about this? Do you think they had explosives already in the buildings?
They had to.
Yep. Yeah, the crew that went in there, I think it was a week before, fixing the elevator. Because the elevator was the center of the building. And to get a controlled explosion, you have to go up, 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 up in the center of and collapse the center of it so that you don't have that excess. Yeah. You don't have that excess debris. So they were in there to fix the elevators. But they weren't really in there to fix the elevators. Yes, thermite does cut through steel.
Now, what is thermite?
It is a high intense burning kind of explosive.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. High temperatures.
Magnesium girders,
Yeah.
did the steel, NIST commissioned numerous tests, some of which were conducted by a company called Underwriters Labs.
And Kevin Ryan, he's the former employee from Underwriters Laboratories who challenged the NIST report and went public with it. Within a week, he was fired from his job.
We did test the floor models in August of 2004. And those tests disproved the primary theory behind the collapse of the buildings. Was called the pancake theory. Floors would collapse on each other into a stack of pancakes, and then the columns were no longer supported, the columns would fall apart. Well, the floor models didn't collapse in the tests, and these were in furnaces. You know, testing furnaces, much hotter temperature, longer periods of time. They still didn't collapse. So yeah, a few months later, the government put out an update on their report. And they stated not only that the floors did not collapse, but they had done tests on the few samples they had saved from the fire zones. And those tests proved that the temperatures were very low. Temperatures were not hot enough to even soften steel. And yet, they're coming out with a summary statement that says that's what actually did happen. The floors did collapse and the steel did soften. So they either downplayed those results or ignored those results, and they ended up putting it all in a computer.
Thanks to computers, NIST managed to straighten this problem out, and the old pancake theory was replaced by the inward bowing theory. According to the Institute, the heat weakened the floors, which started to curve downwards. The external walls of the towers also curved inwards until they could no longer bear the weight of the structures above, causing the towers to collapse.
Their final theory is almost entirely computer-based. And the computer itself is not really accessible. They haven't given it to us to examine. After having investigated it more over the last year and a half, I found that yes, they did contradict their test results, but additionally, they also did manipulate the test parameters. They doubled one thing, they cut something else in half. For example, their story says that aircraft combustibles are at 13 tons in the aircraft cabin. The FAA says it's more like an average of 6.5 tons. It's double. So they double it. They double the time that the computer model exposes columns to fire, 90 minutes instead of what we know is 45 or 50 minutes in both buildings, actually. So they double it. They cut something else in half. They double it.
One of the things that particularly struck me was the incredible speed with which the towers came down. There was something truly inexplicable about the speed of the collapse. If we dropped a weight from a height of around 400 meters, which was the height of the towers, the time it would take to reach the ground, supposing that there was not even any air resistance to slow down the speed of the fall, would take approximately 9 seconds.
Took about 8 or 10 seconds for the whole tower just to go straight down.
The impact was at about 2/3 of the way up the tower. Even if the section above collapsed suddenly due to the structure giving way, and even considering that the impact of the section above was enormous and therefore in some way weakened the resistance of the structures below, it is clear that, due to the resistance of the undamaged part below, this tower should not have fallen at such a speed. But it fell as if there was nothing below it, whereas there was enormous structure below.
And let's bear in mind that that structure below was undamaged, not hot, could have provided a lot of resistance to the stuff above coming down.
Yeah. Yeah, and you notice how that computer generated program said that the center and the floors, you know, kind of odd how it was, exactly like
explosions in the center.
Yeah, like where the elevators were at, you know. kind of convenient. Yeah, this is a pretty good video too, Zach. I'm glad Zach didn't show my video, because he says this one's 40 minutes. Loose change is like 2 hours long.
I've got that saved. I will definitely be checking that out.
Yeah. But I will say though, that guy that was doing the comparison between the Madrid and the New York City, his eyes were freaking me out, because he was looking one way and the other. Just like, that's just freaking me out, bro. I hate to be mean, but
This is over 2 hours, but I'm going to only show 40 minutes.
oh, the next one is okay. Oh, this one is. Oh, okay, okay. This one's on. Okay. Yeah. Wow. I don't think you'll find any under 2 hours of 9/11.
Resistance structure that should have slowed down the speed of the collapse considerably. Here, close to the two towers, there was another large tower, which was hit by the debris from the tower that collapsed.
This building is huge.
Oh, there's my creepy eye, dude.
Story building was never hit by a jet. And yet it came down that same day, but 7 hours after the last tower fell, 7 hours later. Measure the time of fall. The fall is almost free fall speed.
The collapse of the North Tower inflicts some damage to Building 7, causing fires to ignite on a few floors. Even the official version admits that fire has a low probability of causing the collapse. But why does total collapse take place? And why does it occur at free fall speed?
As I saw the collapse of World Trade Center 7, I realized this was something that needed to be studied and could not be ignored.
Building 7 and the Twin Towers share one utterly bewildering similarity: the presence of molten metal found in the debris of all three buildings weeks after the collapse.
Is this molten metal that we have now studied at length that came from these buildings and existed then in pools underneath the rubble of all three skyscrapers, both towers and Building 7.
A metallographic analysis was conducted by a specialized institute that examined the structure of a girder taken from Ground Zero.
Quando sono state sfilate queste travi, la parte che era sotto le macerie pare.
When these girders were extracted from under the rubble, it seems as if parts of them had melted. This is totally inexplicable because the temperatures reached by the fires could only have been 800 degrees at the most. To melt a steel girder you have to reach temperatures of around 1600 degrees. How could this be? At a microscopic level, if you examine the granular structure of the steel, one can detect the presence of an element that should not normally be present, and it is there in substantial quantities. Sulfur.
Quite sure now where this molten metal came from. It came from a material called ⅏⅍ which is aluminum powder, iron oxide, and sulfur.
The temperature is so high that steel melts. It could only melt if the temperature reached over 1000 degrees in a few seconds. The use of thermite could certainly cause the fusion apparent in the steel beams.
You see, the presence of thermite now in these buildings to bring them down implies that someone had to place the thermite near the steel columns in order to cut through the column. I have interviewed a demolition expert, and he said this is what they do. They set explosives. They can use radio control to initiate the firing of the explosive. They have to be done in a sequence in order to get the building to come down rapidly and straight down. A controlled demolition.
And there you have it, folks.
No doubt.
Yeah, especially I love the side-by-side comparisons in this video.
See, I believe that it was government officials helping.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And one of the things that I took away from it, like we could throw all this, we could throw this evidence at everybody, but how many remember exactly how President Bush reacted when the Secret Service told him? And I understand they try to say, well, we didn't want to freak out the kids or anything.
Right.
But whenever the United States is under attack and the president could be a potential target, they don't really give a fuck who they're around. You know, they're going to whisk him out of there. And the face that he made was like, oh, okay, it's done.
I understand.
I understand. Yeah, exactly. That was the biggest giveaway that I remember. Yep, did not flinch. Yep, everybody remembers he was not surprised. He didn't react. He didn't flinch. That right there told me he knew it was going to happen. And that link that I put in there too, Zach, of the truth about 9/11 from a flight attendant's perspective. This woman worked there she worked in the airlines for 30 years. She said, if there was, the thing that put her mind at ease is if there was any situation in the air, the military was going to be right there within 5 minutes. And on 9/11, where were the aircrafts? Where were the jets?
Nowhere.
They weren't anywhere around. Yeah, they were conveniently off doing training. Yeah. Right, the training.
I don't remember what would be the flight time from Boston to New York anyway. Not that long.
No. In a F-18?
Well, I was talking about the passenger planes.
Oh, okay.
But it did. I mean, as soon as they went off course, somebody had to say something, you know.
I'd say less than an hour, Tom.
Yeah.
Oh, much less than an hour, I would think.
Yeah. Yeah, less than an hour. I mean, even a blind man could see.
Even Stevie Wonder can see this.
Yeah,
you know?
right. Yeah, there's just too much.
Look how it's coming down in the center, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and the comparison of the dust cloud is very similar too.
Scientists, we look at different hypotheses, different explanations, but then we have to look at all the data to see which explanation fits the best. You have to incorporate all the picture. Yes, you may take an isolated fact like the plume and say, well, perhaps that was a high air pressure that somehow blew a window out, but that will not account for the molten metal or the sulfidation or the molten pools.
When the South Tower collapsed and blew into my apartment directly across from the World Trade Center, I saved the dust. I gave it to Stephen Johnson.
The dust that was provided by Mrs. McHenry is very interesting because it's like a snapshot of the residue being produced by the tower during its collapse. Perfect. Now we look in the dust and we see metal droplets. And when I saw that, I thought, whoa, this is what I expect from thermite, because I've done a number of thermite experiments and you get small metal drops being thrown out in all directions. And this is what we see in the dust now, these little metal drops. We also see barium. This is very interesting because barium nitrate and sulfur are part of the military patent on what is known as thermate. This is thermite with sulfur and barium nitrate added to make this material cut more rapidly through steel. Barium is a very toxic metal, so one would not ordinarily expect this to be present in the large concentrations that we see. Well, the fact that we see it in these and in the dust is a very strong indication to me that the military form of thermite that has been used. It turned out that literally dozens of firefighters and emergency medical workers had given testimony that they had heard 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, some said 10 explosions going off in the building. Some of the people in the buildings reported that they were banged around and knocked downstairs by explosions. Other people testified
testified to seeing flashes, and many of them said it looked just like on TV when we see them bring down buildings with explosions. We saw the flashes, we saw the demolition things, we heard the sounds.
I worked there for 20 years and I was a janitor, the person that cleaned all the floors. The building has 6 up-levels of basement. The support companies for the cleaning of the World Trade Center were located on Big One. While I was there at 846, all of a sudden we hear boom, an explosion so hard that pushed us up. When I went to verbalize it, like 6 seconds after, we hear that boom, that impact all the way on the top. So 2 different events. And at that very moment, when I said, "Oh my God," a guy comes running into the office, and this guy had his hands extended, both arms like this, and his skin was pulled totally from both arms, and he was hanging from the top of the fingertips like he was clothing. And I thought at that time that it was clothing. And when I went to say something, I realized, I looked at his face, I realized that he had missing parts of his face.
He had, on that particular day, the only master key. He went up with the master key, unlocking door after door so firemen could get in. And he himself, I think he said, brought out 15 or 20 people.
So I started opening the doors of the stairwells so people could escape.
Willard was made a hero, and he was at the White House. And we have a picture of that, of George Bush honoring Willie Rodriguez for being a hero.
We hear boom, 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 different explosions. And I asked the fire department, I said, "What is this explosion?" And what they said was, maybe it's the gas tank from the kitchen. No, the kitchens were all electric. So that didn't make any sense.
I heard a loud explosion, an explosion that I have never heard in my whole life, an enormous explosion.
My ears were hearing loud explosions at ground level, very mysterious. Explosions that seemed to be at ground level as opposed to high in the air.
There's no question in my mind that those buildings, based on the law of physics, could not have collapsed without the assistance of a bomb.
No! When I hear another explosion, no! I think it's a bomb.
Willie has taken really 180% turn of events, saying here that President Bush, who had honored him being a hero, he's named on this lawsuit as accusing Bush and Cheney and Senior Bush and others of murder. And he's not doing it for any monetary gain because this has just cost us everything. Willie has lost his home, lost his job. Right now, his goal is to find out the truth.
According to the official story of the 11th of September, at 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon. This rare footage shows the scene immediately after the impact, an hour before the entire structure collapsed. As you can see, it is a rather unusual scene. One would reasonably expect to see something of this sort. That is to say, pieces of the airplane, suitcases, debris everywhere, just like every other air crash on land. Instead, there is no substantial visual evidence of debris.
I have been on some accident investigation sites in the Air Force, and I have never come across any accident scene where there's no telltale evidence of the airplane that crashed. Here we have airplane sites, crash sites, that give zero evidence.
Where did the airplane go? Did it break up against the wall of the Pentagon? If it had done so, thousands of parts of the plane should have been scattered all over the
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then there was like, there were light poles right across, you know, like why didn't the light poles get taken out by the wings?
Right. Why didn't the walls themselves show damage from the wings? I mean, those wings spread wide.
Mm-hmm.
How was it just a hole?
Right.
Something smells fishy here, guys.
Oh, sorry, Zach. I did take a shower. Oh, you were talking about that. Okay. I just had to do it, Zach. Yeah, it definitely does, bro. But, oh, hey, Anarchy. Over the bridge, no shoes. Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah, and I like how they try to paint the picture of people that question it, that they're like, oh, you think nobody died? No, we know people died. We just don't think they died in the way that the media was telling us and the government's been telling us. You know.
And they did die horrible, painful deaths too.
Mm-hmm.
And terrifying. Can you imagine those people jumping out of those buildings?
Yeah.
You know, you're so desperate to get away from the danger right there, you don't even consider you're not going to survive the escape.
Right.
And I don't know about the CGI. I tend to believe that airplanes really did fly into the buildings, but that was just to justify the controlled demolition that came seconds later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also kind of find it hard to believe that, and I know it's probably going to ruffle some feathers up, but I find it hard to believe if you watch it and play it in slow motion, I find it hard to believe that they were commercial airplanes, because the commercial airplanes are usually very shiny and they're pretty colorful, but military airplanes are designed to kind of blend into the sky. And
plain Jane, yeah.
Yeah, plain Jane. And I remember watching it in slow motion and going, wow, that plane is not very shiny. And that was my first thought, was it was an actual like Air Force airplane.
I never paid any attention to that. I'll have to try to look into that too.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, just the oh my God factor. You miss details. At least I do, you know. I got to run off for another second. Please.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. And yes, Milo, commercial airplanes are more shinier than military airplanes. Oh, I thought you were going to play it, Zach.
Sounds to say.
You know, things like engines and landing gears, and brakes and tires are very difficult to destroy. Very difficult because they're made out of very high tempered steel, and I don't believe the airplane can be made to go fast enough to pulverize those things. I've never seen that happen before. You look around, there's a 16-foot hole for an airplane that's 100 and something wide.
According to the official story, the American Airlines Boeing 757 disappeared inside this hole. Can you see it? 5 meters. I repeat, 5 meters in diameter. Let's make some calculations. A Boeing 757 is, including its wingspan, of course, 38 meters wide. And including the rudder or the tail fin, it is 13.5 meters high. To get all of this huge aircraft into a hole 5 meters wide seems rather implausible to me. In this picture, we can see a row of windows on this side and another row on that side. They should have been smashed and destroyed by the wings, and instead they're intact. These windows aren't even broken. For years, the military refused to answer the questions of an increasing number of people who rejected the official version. When the French journalist Thierry Meyssan published the book The Incredible Lie, utterly surreal explanations were put forward to shut the detractors up. One of these maintained that the airplane had been vaporized by the speed and the force of the crash. One very strange thing that doesn't make sense is the disappearance of various components of this Boeing. For example, the 2 engines. And what about the plane's wings? Where did they go? Had they been gasified? Instead, we are told the fuselage remained intact, and it smashed through the whole outer wall of the Pentagon and emerged through the other side, destroying a number of columns. The most solid part of the airplane is without any doubt the engines. In fact, these engines are made of a titanium steel alloy. It is so tough that it doesn't even melt at 3,000 degrees centigrade. Well now, in this wall we should be able to see, if nothing else, the holes made by the 2 engines that smashed into it. No, there is no sign of them. The 2 holes that we'd expect to see are not there.
And there's no indication of the wings hitting anything at the Pentagon, like you had at the North Tower. You can see the outline of the aircraft, a 25-degree bank angle. You can clearly see the outline of the number 1 engine, the fuselage of number 2 engine. It's a 25-degree bank. The wing dihedral is up in flight, and you can clearly see the outline of that airplane. But you can't find anything like that in the Pentagon. You can't find anything like that.
These inconsistencies have created more and more difficulties for the proponents of the official version. So, while the military kept silent during this debacle, various photos of airplane debris found on the external lawns and along the supposed route of the
This was the most highly protected airspace in the... Oh. Yep. And it took forever for them to release that video too of that kind of had the good angle, you know, and they only released like 4 frames, and like, why did it take so long? And then when you saw it, you could clearly see there was something white coming in, you know. But I remember when I initially saw it, and they released 3 frames, and all you saw was nothing, explosion.
No airplane.
Yeah. No airplane. And I think it was a missile.
Seems very plausible that it was. The lack of engines is pretty damning, really. I had no idea the melting point of titanium. Oh. Yeah, nothing got that hot there.
And I think that part of the Pentagon was hit by a it had just recently been reinforced, from my understanding.
So basically it's a total setup, in my opinion. I believe it was missiles or explosives in the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most likely a missile, I would think. Chrissy Cat, I'm pretty sure there were deaths, but I don't remember a number.
Within the building started appearing in newspapers and on the web.
Va bene, niente gassificazione.
Very well, they admitted there was no gasification, but another theory was immediately put forward. It suggested that in order to enter a hole 5 meters wide, at a certain moment, the airplane somehow closed up its wings, just as dragonflies do. There they are. The engine and the other pieces of the plane were found there.
One of my experiences in the Army was being in charge of the Army's imagery interpretation for scientific and technical intelligence during the Cold War. I measured pieces of Soviet equipment from photographs. It was my job. I look at the hole in the Pentagon, and I look at the size of an airplane that was supposed to have hit the Pentagon. The plane does not fit in that hole. So what did hit the Pentagon? What hit it? Where is it? What hit it? What's going on?
General Arnold, that very morning, immediately after that alleged impact, ordered one of his fighter pilots to fly over and down to the Pentagon to look and see what he saw and to report back to General Larry Arnold himself.
At that time, Major General Larry Arnold was Commander of Aviation at NORAD, North American Aerospace Defense Command, in charge of protecting the United States and Canada.
His fighter pilot reported back to him that there was no evidence, zero evidence, of an impact of a plane at the Pentagon.
Since the Pentagon possessed 86 separate and complete video recordings of the incident, Why didn't they show some whole portions of them to those people who had doubts about it?
The FBI was immediately at the scene and took the surveillance tapes and confiscated 86 videotapes, both in the Pentagon parking lot, in the gas station, across the freeway from the Pentagon, in a nearby hotel, in all kinds of buildings that had their cameras trained in that general area.
For a long time, the military authorities refused to release the footage of Flight 77's impact. But in 2006, the United States Department of Defense was forced to yield to Freedom of Information requests, and it released 4 video sequences. The video evidence from the Pentagon's Citgo gas station and the nearby Sheraton Hotel are of no use. But 2 samples of video footage captured from the Pentagon's parking lot have been offered to the world as definitive proof of Flight 77's impact with the Pentagon. They're almost identical.
Jet engines don't emit white smoke. You have some white smoke.
See, there's that video.
Half end of whatever vehicle. Quite frankly, there's not enough in those photographs to tell exactly what it was, but we can tell what it wasn't. And it didn't have the size as compared. If it was a real 757-200, it would be much bigger than the vehicle we do see in the picture.
With the best will in the world, can you see an airplane here? The Pentagon tells us you cannot see the airplane because, unfortunately, it passed between one frame and the next.
Give me a break.
Frame and the next. So where is the airplane?
What is that? One frame for every 5 seconds?
As you can see in this affidavit, only one camera took pictures of the scene, and those are the frames that we've already seen. The story of how this airplane is supposed to have got there is absolutely absurd. One cannot imagine how, in order to get down to the height of the Pentagon wall, it was able to make a 270-degree turn at a speed of approximately 800 kilometers per hour.
That is a really difficult maneuver. And what I will say to you is that an experienced pilot with thousands of hours probably would have to take between 10 and 20 attempts. Skilled, thousands of hour pilot, probably 10 or 20 times before they would be able to pull off that maneuver.
757 is not designed to do that. 757 is designed to be basically a cruise ship in the sky. It's not acrobatic, so you just can't do that with one of those big airplanes. Air traffic controllers at the Dulles Approach Control, when they saw this target come in and make this turn, they said, oh, that's a fighter. Because military fighters can do that, okay? And military fighters with autopilots and being flown remotely, they have the structural capability. They are designed to be able to be that acrobatic.
Absurdity of absurdities. There is also the height at which this aeroplane was flying to be explained. It is supposed to have followed the lie of the land at 6 meters from the ground for 1 kilometer, managing also to jump over a hill. Then it went over a roadway, and it finally got there without making any other turns because by now there was no more space.
They have the airplane, the story has the Flight 77 was going 530 miles an hour, 460 knots. And it can't go that fast. Flight down that low. They're up high, but your airspeed can go up and it can go that fast, but not down low. The air is too dense.
I challenge any pilot anywhere. Give him a Boeing 757, tell him to do 400 knots 20 feet above the ground for half a mile. Can't do. It's aerodynamically.
So the story of how they opened the Pentagon is just doesn't make any sense at all.
After Ħaniħanġur, the plane's pilot, had been identified, his flight instructor declared that his student was not even able to fly a small single-engine aeroplane.
These guys didn't have the experience to make that kind of maneuver, even if the airplane could fly.
The man could not fly at all.
There's no way you could possibly come out of a 172 and fly a jet you've never flown before. That's like showing me how to carve up a Christmas turkey and then say, go make a heart transplant.
Even if we suppose that such an incompetent pilot had the opportunity to fly a Boeing 757, we still have to ask ourselves how he managed to violate the most heavily protected airspace in the world.
No untracked aircraft get near the Pentagon and near the White House. It just doesn't happen.
In Washington, D.C., we have one of the most restricted airspaces in the world. It's called P-56. It has a separate radar tracking system and a separate military response system.
P-56 is that restricted airspace that is around the Pentagon and the White House, and it is a highly, highly, highly sensitive area. There are supposed to be no unknown aircraft that can go through there.
That has a air defense identification zone in a 50-mile radius around D.C., and then it has a protected zone 17 miles around the Washington Monument and an inner protected zone 3 miles around the Capitol. That space is essentially unbreachable. It has to be because of the importance of the buildings there.
It's like an aviation no man's land. Nobody goes in there. Nobody.
They have F-16 and F-18 jets at Andrews Air Force Base, about 10 miles south of D.C. They also have the 113th National Guard Air Wing at Anacostia Naval Air Station that can send scrambler jets up in a very short period of time. But
So how do they get through?
Mind-blowing, isn't it?
Truly. Absolutely.
I love how I jumped ahead. I talked about the four frames, and then they showed it.
And the light poles.
Yeah, the light poles. Yeah, you can tell I've done my research on these things. Zach, you didn't even need these videos. You just need me up here. I'm just kidding. You definitely need these videos, man. Share with these people. Biggest question is why? That's what people want to know. Why do this? Other than war, of course.
Well, and to give the events in New York some credibility. Pretty elaborate plan, really.
Yeah, it's definitely a military strike, you know, military planning. And after going over to Afghanistan, they just kind of wing it over there, you know.
It's all about fear. When the government has us in fear, they have more control to do stuff behind the scenes.
You're right. You're right. And then we were so outraged and blaming somebody halfway around the world. So, you know.
Yeah. And faith or charity, I don't know what I'm supposed to call you, faith, hope, and charity. Right. You know, the Patriot Act was born after that. Gave them the right to spy on the American people. In the name of safety.
Right.
This is my safety.
To convince us to give up liberty for a little safety. Benjamin Franklin said, if we do that, we deserve neither.
V, that the answer to that is in loose change. And probably the answer to that is in this.
That's basically why I covered the Patriot Act last Wednesday.
Yeah. Yeah, because the flight manifest for that, for one of the, I think it was the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. It had a couple of it only had 63 passengers, and it's a 250 passenger plane. The passengers were a mixture of elitists in some way, elitist family. There was some Navy, there was DOD members, stuff like that. So that's what the manifest said. So what happened to the passengers that were on the flight that hit the Pentagon? They may have been executed. You never know.
And you folks that fly.
This is Wix.
I haven't been on an airplane since I was 5 years old. How often will an airline fly a plane that size at 20% capacity? That doesn't make any sense financially to me. Why wouldn't they put 50 people on a smaller plane?
Yeah. Now I've flown, and I've never on a big plane like that. I've never seen an empty seat.
Right. That was my point.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen enough movies to know that, you know.
Yeah, I've been on enough flights where I'm praying that the person, you know, it's the 3 seats, and I'm like praying that the middle person isn't there.
In
you know,
fact.
so that yeah, and fat, you know, so that me and the person that's next to the window or the aisle or wherever I'm sitting is like we have our space and everything, and you know, no, it never happens. Never happens. Especially now with you know, the pandemic. Even still, they were still packing everything.
Right. Callie, I can believe an empty row here and there, but we're talking 80% of the plane being empty, according to the manifest.
Yeah, and you're talking about a big airplane.
A great big airplane. They're not
Yeah.
cheap to fly.
Yeah.
Oh, and I might cover a movie sometime backstage because it set up the pandemic.
Would you mind repeating that, Zach?
Yeah.
Oh, and I might cover a movie sometime backstage because it set up the pandemic.
Okay. Yeah, it could have been different back then, because I can't really talk about back then, because I didn't really fly until after 2001. So I'm just talking, like, it's kind of odd after 2001, terrorists hit, and then now all of a sudden they start packing planes, you know, and then that's when I started flying. So it would be a little odd, you know. You would think you wouldn't want to fill a plane by then. I mean, it's the way I think. Mm-hmm. No more taking your shoes off to get through security. I'm gonna have to step away for a second, guys.
So next up, Sandy Hook.
Okay.
Deal with all the time is this one over the top. I've been at this for a third of a century, and it's my sensibilities may not be the average man, but this probably is the worst I have seen, or the worst that I know of any of my colleagues having seen, and that all the more makes me proud and grateful to our staff, who, to a man, have just behaved most professionally and strongly. And I hope they and I hope the people of Newtown don't have a crash on their head later. Good thing it's not being prosecution, because then I couldn't answer that. But all the ones that I know of at this point were caused by the long weapon. Yes. Question was, what caliber were these bullets? And I probably know more about firearms than most pathologists, but if I say it in court, they yell at me and don't make me answer. So I'll let the police deal with that for you. I only did 7 of the autopsies. The victims I had ranged from 3 to 11 wounds apiece, and I only saw 2 of them with close-range shooting. But that's that's a sample. I really don't have detailed information on the rest of the injuries. Yes.
Not correct, sir.
Oh, I'm lucky I can tell you how many I found. I don't know. There were lots of them. Okay. This type of weapon is not. The bullets are designed in such fashion that the energy. This is very clinical. I shouldn't be saying this, but the energy is deposited in the tissue, and so the bullet stays in. That's always a difficult question, and obviously I don't have detailed information on all of them, but this is a very devastating set of injuries. I don't, the best of my ability to answer that question, which is always less than perfect, if so, not for very long.
Anybody find anything odd about that? Kind of a strange questioning and answer. You know, especially for a coroner. Making a lot of jokes. That was really odd. I sent that to Zach because I was trying to find some good ones. Right. Saying I probably shouldn't be saying this. It's very medical.
Right.
There, you know, like, come on. You know, I'm not even a coroner. If they were trying to say that he was using, you know, the AR-15, what kind of caliber was being used? Oh, it was a .223, or it was a .556. The handgun ammunition he used was 9mm. He also used a shotgun, which was 12 gauge. You can't answer that question. You know, that's.
he did seem to be very impressed with himself. We'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of and jokes, for sure. Like, why would you joke? It's something very serious just happened, and you're over there making jokes about people yelling at you using verbiage in the courtroom.
To me, he sounded cocky.
Very.
Mm-hmm. Right, Callie. Callie said he was giddy with his payoff.
Okay, let's shift gears to Bob. Appreciate him holding 15 minutes. I got behind today, and it got compounded. I wanted to get you on yesterday, but I couldn't. on this latest disinfo. And we'll talk about that next segment. But I separately wanted to get your take on Trump's tweet that Twitter better watch it, and that there will be repercussions, and that he's coming after him. I've got the inside baseball on that. I know you've got your ear to the ground. What do you make of this?
Well, he's starting to accelerate, and I think it's been critical that he do so. Action.
That means real organized crime, like Hillary Clinton and like Barack Obama, who's in bed with Hezbollah. And so I just don't think it's not a threat to these people. It's just that I just can't believe they're projecting onto me who they are. That they're projecting onto me that I live off these families when I barely ever talked about them, and they play edited tapes of what I really said. And that's why they're so pissed, is they realize they don't have a damn case, but it's just dealing with them and watching what they do. I believe they're involved in some type of parallel construction. What do you think?
Well, there's no question that there's a false premise of the suit, because the suit in Connecticut is entirely predicated on the assumption that this was a analytically market-driven product, that this was not about independent, authentic ideas or independent perspectives of the world, that instead that it was entirely driven heavily just by Sandy Hook. And the reason why I have reason to believe that they know that allegation is false from the inception is that they have quote unquote media experts that are working with them, that are aligned with them, that are supporting them in different respects, who have reviewed, according to their own sworn testimony, various all the websites, all the web pages, all the broadcasts. You have people like Media Matters who are watching and recording and transcribing every single broadcast. So they knew there was no marketing tie-in to anything related to beliefs and issues debating Sandy Hook, because they saw the broadcast themselves. They saw the web pages themselves. They searched the broadcast themselves. They searched the web pages themselves. And there was no advertising or marketing specific to Sandy Hook ever. There was nothing tied into it. Not only that.
So Norm Pattis is a smart guy, but he's a busy guy. What are we going to tell the judge? Like, Judge, these people tell you I'm this villain. They tell you I live off these dead kids. They're the one that sued the dead teacher and all these heroes and people, these lawyers, these creatures. And it's just, we're not who they say. There is no evidence because it doesn't exist. That's what's so frustrating is, as you said, they know none of this is there. You've spent over a month here in our offices over the time. There's no planning. There's no marketing. It's all research. It's all guessed. It's all analysis. It's all going out and videotaping stuff. What's our research? We think it's wrong that people from the Congo, with one of the biggest outbreaks of Ebola ever, are just by the thousands being brought up. We go videotape it. It becomes national news. Where's there is no marketing. Our news is our news. What I think is important, you've been around here, just for the audience to know, have you seen any calculation, any premeditated of anything?
Not at all. In fact, everything at the program is focused entirely on news content. Ideas, spreading ideas, sharing ideas, researching ideas, investigating ideas, challenging establishment narratives, challenging political narratives, challenging the political power structure. That's the obsession of everybody who works there. To be frank, from a business perspective, there probably should have been marketing analytics and business studies and things like that, but you've never cared about that, never focused on it.
Let's be honest, you saw my taxes. I've been totally overpaying like an idiot.
Oh, completely. And not only that, I mean, for example, there probably are product studies that could have been done. You never do that. In other words, you look at what you like in the real world.
But the products too aren't connected to news. I have hundreds of clips I didn't get to. I have stacks of incredible stuff here. I've got Vladimir Putin saying the world's going to end. I haven't even played that today. And they just go, oh, Sandy Hook, because they all are so politically dumb. These few Democrat lawyers think that's how they get in the news. They don't even know that the analytics, I'll tell you the analytics, when we covered a Sandy Hook story, I was on Joe Rogan. They put out over 30 videos. The average video has 3 million views. One of them has 14 million or whatever. These guys, the marketing is, I go, Joe, no one wants to hear about Sandy Hook, but okay, open it. The Sandy Hook piece has 200,000 views. The next lowest one has like 1.5 million. That's analytics. Is that, and I don't cover something because I think it'll be big. I cover what I care about. But the analytics to these idiots is this. Everyone's sick of Sandy Hook, you dirty, stupid people. Using these poor families. My God, you bloodsuckers. I'm not the bloodsucker. I'm not sucking off the dead kids and the families. In my view and opinion, you're a bloodsucker. And it's just incredible. Barnes, I'm getting upset here because I am so sick of Sandy Hook, and I'm so sick of them saying, I'm like, oh my God, Alex Jones, did you know he named his son after Sandy Hook? You know, he pays for his toilet paper with Sandy Hook. All Sandy Hook ever did was cost me money. We had stations when I questioned it take me off the air. And we have thank God we looked into the analytics. It actually shows that. So what are they going to do, Bob, when the analytics show what we're saying is true, which you'd already told me? You just say, give it all to them. My issue is checking liability for what they can monkey with in there.
Well, I mean, the reality of the way Google works is that Google tracks a wide range of data for their own personal purposes.
Well, that's my next point. I don't have access to hardly any of it.
Correct, and that's deliberate by Google. Google does not allow people to have access to that except on a subscriber basis and on a limited basis and on a search order basis. So this is not data that any private company can own other than Google, because Google wants to monopolize that data, because Google is using that data to monetize what Google does. One of the great myths out there that some of the courts have bought into is that these big tech companies are offering free services. No, they're not. Google is monetizing the information for their own personal purposes. Anytime any human being searches Google, they are giving Google their personal private information, which Google will in turn monetize. And that's what Google does. This is Google's assets, Google's data.
I know. And so what do because I don't know how to respond to this judge. Like, I don't even know how this stuff all works. I barely ever looked at it. And they're just like, give us the Google. Well, we aren't even able to give you the Google. What does that even mean? Welcome back. I'm Alex Jones, your host. Robert Barnes, constitutional lawyer, riding shotgun. I don't want to spend much more time on this, and I kind of went into a rant. But when I got sued by the Sandy Hook folks in Texas and in Connecticut, 5 different lawsuits about a year and a half ago, I knew Hillary came out and made that who I was and focused on that in the campaign. But I thought, okay, the lawyers involved, though, might actually be drinking the Kool-Aid. They might actually believe in the bull. No, they know. They know I hardly ever talked about it. They know we don't have all this stuff. They know we didn't sell anything Sandy Hook related. They know that I didn't get up there and lie and question public events and false flags like I questioned today. Was this staged with Iran? There's been so many staged events before. And they know I didn't create questioning it. They know it's totally American to do what I did. So they project this idea that I'm made all this money off Sandy Hook. And then when there's no evidence of that, they just keep demanding, well, give it this, or give that, or any company we're ever connected to, well, give us all their data, and that'll show what you did. So they can try to misrepresent it to people that aren't technically informed. And that's really what I believe is going on here, is a deliberate attempt to deceive the judge. And I'm not even worried about my particular case. I'm just running into the political class and just how bottomless they are and how bad they are and how the media works in concert to do this for this electronic lynching. And then in my name, they're on NPR and we're going, we just wish he'd stop sending people to their houses and saying it didn't happen. If he just apologized, and it's all a lie. They know that years ago I said, well, even before they sued me, I said, well, if your feelings are hurt that I questioned, I apologize. And they go, oh, you admit you lied. And then it just goes on and on and on, the coordinated garbage. And then in my name, these politicians and these talk show hosts like John Ronson, do never interview him, folks. He will lie to your face. He will edit stuff, incredibly deceptive. They try to murder the truth, and then they say you're the one doing it. So I want to digress into some more important things, or stop digressing and get into more important things happening in the world and censorship. But I think this is really a sign of desperation by these folks. What do you think, Robert?
Well, there's no doubt that there's this attempt to try to create the impression of you as being that caricature character from Homeland. And the media has tried to highlight aspects of any aspect of the litigation in a way to highlight that component, even though it's completely and utterly false. I mean, now you've had teams of lawyers come down and you gave them full, unfettered, unlimited, unrestricted access to all of your data and information, gave far more access than any client.
Okay. I go ahead and get this.
I tried my best to find a video for Sandy Hook.
Yeah, you're not gonna you're not gonna find one. Oh, good, cool.
If I remember right, they even destroyed the school building, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just put a link in the chat, and that link takes you to the FBI yearly statistics, you know, and it covers everything. And I want to bring it up so I can quote it correctly. That is for the state of Connecticut. And if you click that link, it's table 8. Go to the city. Of course, it has each row. First row is city, then population. First one is, and then it's violent crime, murder, and non-negligent manslaughter, forcible rape, robbery, aggravated assault, property crime, burglary, larceny, motor vehicle theft, and arson. If you go down, if you go to the column that says murder,
Mayhem, if you can hear me, you've shut off. Your video's been locked for a little while.
okay, it's probably because I was on something else. Could you hear me though?
Up until just a few seconds ago.
Oh, okay, yeah. If you go to that FBI website and you go to murder and non-negligent manslaughter, go down the row all the way to Newtown, and you'll be interested to see that for the year of 2012 there was zero murders, but they just had a mass shooting.
So that wasn't counted as murders in the FBI's statistics.
All right. Why wouldn't it be? It should be 27.
Yeah.
But it says 0.
Wow. You know, I've heard the theory that it never happened, and you know, God forgive me for believing that if there are actual grieving parents. I'm very sensitive to that.
Mm-hmm.
I could believe it happened, and my theory is the agenda to take away our right to arm ourselves. 20 couple kids is no price to pay at all. They've been willing to allow the murder of 60 million unborn babies, and I think most of that is probably to save money on welfare. So what's 20 kids, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the agenda's plain. Look at that idiot Beto O'Rourke today, what he did while the governor of Texas is trying to console families. I don't know whether you've seen that atrocity or not.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, you haven't seen Beto O'Rourke stood up and started yelling at the governor of Texas that he wasn't doing anything to protect the citizens. His 2A agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And he had to be escorted out by police.
Right.
And you got grieving parents sitting there listening to this blather. So yeah, if Sandy Hook happened at all, it was completely agenda driven. And I think most of these mass shootings are.
Yeah.
Of course, they have a serious problem with the one yesterday because the perpetrator was not a conservative nutcase.
Yeah, violent crime is 7, Silver Girl says, but no, that's mass shooting wouldn't be considered violent crime. It'd be considered a murder.
See, I honestly think they do shootings under Democratic administration so they can keep trying to chip away at our Second Amendment.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And now they have politicians calling for the outright abolishment of the Second Amendment, which is not as easy as they would like to think it is.
Yeah, and like the shooting in Texas, I was just talking to a buddy of mine. Technically, it was yesterday, but
yeah,
I almost said today, but it was technically yesterday. Yeah, his son goes to school 10 minutes away from that, but he said his son feels safe because they have one way in, they have magnetic door locks. You have to get buzzed in. You have to check in with the woman. She's behind bulletproof glass. You know, she buzzes you in after she gives you a ID card, and you're escorted. And I was like, well, see, that just goes to prove he could have easily chose your son's school, but he saw a hardened target.
Right.
And said, no, that's too hard. Went to the other school that had absolutely no sense of security whatsoever. Not even a school resource officer there.
And apparently got into one room, and all the casualties were one room.
Yeah. And I don't like, and my buddy brought it up to me, and he's like, well, I don't want to make it into a stretch or anything, but all the victims were children of Border Patrol agents.
I believe there were some, or some sort of law enforcement, but I don't think all of them.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. That's what he told me.
I really don't know either. And you don't know if this stuff is true, but they had posted a picture of a male teacher, and this couldn't have been true because I saw that the two teachers that died were female, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they had a picture of this guy, and maybe they said he was shot, maybe not killed, but shot protecting some of those kids. And then right beside it is a picture of the same guy that had supposedly been involved in another tragic. Do you know what I'm talking about, Zach? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember exactly what the details were, but I thought, this is either total bullshit or totally outrageous, one or the other. I mean, there's no middle ground with that.
Yeah.
You can't believe anything you're being told.
Right. And I can't believe that immediately the first thing they go to is let's go ahead and make our innocent people that can't really protect themselves more vulnerable to not be able to protect themselves.
Right. Right.
You know? It's just asinine. Okay, somebody Redneck said there was a resource officer there. Had the first gun battle with him. Huh, I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
I know there were I know that there were 2 police officers shot and they were taken out, and the officer that finally stopped him was a Border Patrol agent that drove like 20 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, instead of hardening the target, change the Constitution.
Right.
Yeah. which is going to take years if it could happen. While immediately, you know, they could take this $40 billion they're planning on sending to Ukraine. And I forget how much money it was broken down, but more than $100,000 per school in this country to use for security.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You know, and me and my buddy, we were talking like, here's an idea. It'll solve several problems, actually. We got a lot of homeless vets, you know, and the one thing about veterans is they're back in the world and they don't really have a sense of purpose. Now, what is the one thing, like, I know there are some people who say, like, oh, you don't know the mental state of a veteran that has PTSD. Well, PTSD is blown out of proportion by the media anyways. But once you give a veteran a sense of purpose and you understand that one of the things that veterans are taught to do is, what do they protect? First and foremost, women and children. You get these homeless people, the homeless vets, off the street. You give them a uniform. You give them, you know, walkie, handcuffs, whatever. You know, you put them out there outside of the school, and they will gladly give their life to those kids. You've given them a purpose. You've given them a job. Kids are going to be safe. You know, it's a win-win.
And that in itself is mentally healing for the guy that's suffering stress syndrome, you know, PTSD. I very rarely get those letters said right, but yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He did shoot his grandmother, posted on Facebook that he was going to, and then posted afterwards that he had. And now I'm going to go shoot up a school.
Yeah.
And
like, why?
Where are the Facebook fact checkers? You know, these people that go back to 2018 to ban me, and they don't catch something like that that's just been posted. Come on.
I just wanted to cover all three of the topics tonight because, again, the government is trying to overstep us by doing events that they think will weaken us. Look, I'm sorry, but the Constitution covers us, and honestly, we have rights to overthrow the government peacefully if need.
Yeah.
Very true, Zach. Very true.
Yeah, and it also, I know Zach said peacefully if need be, but it also covers us to do it with force too. So, like, I have a few friends that may swore an oath to the Constitution, and they don't even know what's really said in the Constitution.
Right.
You know, and
many people don't.
Yeah, it's odd. So, yeah, I'm glad you've covered these topics, Zach. They need to be talked about
and thought about, and you're doing a great service by putting this out here, Zach. as things continue to be pointed out and tied together, more eyes get opened, more brains start thinking. And it's a good fight, man.
Mm-hmm.
But we got to think. You can't be like me and just take things the way they appear. It took me so long to get out of that, and I still sometimes have trouble. But you got to think, who's benefiting from this? What's wrong with this story? You know, start looking for holes in every story you hear, because the holes are there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and definitely don't care. Don't give a shit about labels.
Right.
Somebody calls you a conspiracy theorist. Guess what? It's only a conspiracy theory until it's proven right.
Right.
To be fact, you know. They want to call you a terrorist because you want to stand up for the Constitution. Well, guess what? You know, our forefathers were once called traitors to the crown.
Exactly.
And now, after years, they're now called patriots.
Right.
So the difference between a traitor and a patriot is time.
Or your perception.
Yeah. But that's why I think a lot of people are, you know, the government and the media knows to use fear. You know, people are afraid to lose their job. People are afraid to be out on, you know, the steps of the Capitol. And, you know, I mean, that's why YouTube's a good place to start getting your word out like Zach does. I mean, honestly, if Zach was out at DC and got arrested and everything, and they said this domestic terrorist, you know how many people would be like, oh, bullshit.
Right.
Zach ain't no domestic terrorist. You know.
And you know what? I was told by a friend of mine a couple of years ago, it's been now, and it's good advice. When you start getting called these names, whether it's racist, terrorist, homophobe, whatever, your response should simply be, and?
Right.
That's the way to answer these people.
Right.
Well, hey family, thank you for coming and watching tonight. I just want to help us get as much information as possible so we can make good change for the future. I love you all so much, and the Bible verse for Thursday, May 26, 2022 is, do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. John 14, 1 NIV.
Amen.
Awesome, Zach. Hey, Zach, it was great for you to see me, bro.
Resist.
Right? Resist.
Good night, friends in chat.
We need you now. We need you now. One day, one day, one day, I hope you see the truth. This puppet show stays on because of you. We've been